Hey, welcome to this week's Parsha class with Nechama Leibovich. So there were so many amazing um, essays to choose from. I chose the one on the midwives. Oops, this is the wrong source sheet. Um, for a few reasons. One is because she introduces us to some interesting new commentaries. The other is because I think she took a topic that we all might know a little something about and managed to imbue it with so much added meaning that I thought it was really beautiful. So in the beginning of the book of Shemot, right, we are introduced to, especially in Parak Aleph, the first Parak, which is where we are today. And this week, we're introduced to the nation, right? Nechama talks about this a little bit in some of her essays, that we move from the family story before we move into the story of Moshe, which is like another narrative that revolves around one leading character, just like the story of Yosef or Yaakov or Abraham, Yitzchak. We talk about the nation, and we talk about the way that Paro, right, how he deals wisely with the people, right? That it's subtle. He doesn't get up and say, I am evacuating all of the immigrants tomorrow. Because he thinks that his own people will revolt, Nechama Leibowitz explains, and that you have to be like a little more crafty about how you do it. Um, and one of the tools that she explains is the midwives, right? And she even explains that he says to the midwives, do this quietly, right? Again, trying as, right, first, I think the first step is hard work, right? The second step is quietly killing the baby boys. It doesn't work because the midwives do something different, but it's an interesting plan, right? It's a way to get what he wants without losing political capital, is kind of the way that she explains it, which I just think is so interesting. I see so many things that she wrote about in like the 40s and 50s repeating in our own lives in so many ways. And I wonder what she would say about some of these things today. Um, so I want to share the page. And I think that I've actually taught a class about the midwives before, and I didn't talk about this idea at all, which is the question of who they really are, not in terms of their person, but in terms of their religious identity or their national identity. So okay, let's see. Let's share the page here. Um, oh man, this always happens to me. The most awkward of times. Hold on, I have to sign back in, verify it's me. Hopefully it remembers my password. Oh, dear. Oh, no. Everyone can watch me guess my password. There we go. Um, so she brings the first two psukim from the first parak of Shemot that introduce the midwives to us. While it's loading, there we go. I was at 200. I'm going to make it back there. Hold on. Um, but so the king of Mitzrayim, Paro, right, says to the meal, Dota Ivriot, and we're going to talk in a very grammatical way about how to define those words. Right, the two choices are, as it is translated here, the Hebrew midwives, midwives who are Jewish, or the midwives who are designated to speak to the Jewish or to deal with the Jewish pregnant ladies. Um, Asher Shem Ha'achat Shifra, one of whom was named Shifra, V'Shem Hashenit, and the other Pu'ah. And we're going to look at that pasuk. We're going to really deconstruct that sentence in a grammatical way. So the Paro speaks to Shifra and Puah, the Mialdot ha'ivriot. Vayomer beyaldechen et ha'ivriot, u'ri'iten et ha'avanim im benhu, v'hamiten otam oto v'im bati v'chaya. So the Paro says, right, when you deliver the Hebrew woman, look at the birth stool or the stones, right, that they would squat on. And if it's a boy, the baby that came out as a boy, kill him. If it's a girl, let her live. V'tir'ena hamiyaldot et ha'elohim, which it translated here, right? The midwives feared God, or perhaps gods, their own gods, as we'll see. V'lo asu ka'asher diber alehen melech Mitzrayim v'tichayena et hayeladim. They didn't do what the king of Egypt told them because they were God fearing. in some way. So you can see here, right? Last week was Friday was the fast, the 10th of Tevet, but on the 8th of Tevet, we say that it's a day of mourning because the Torah was translated for the first time into Greek. And it's always rubbed me a little bit the wrong way. Like making Torah more accessible should not be something to mourn for, but something to celebrate. But I read a very good post by my rabbi, Rabbi Jeffrey Fox, saying that you lose something in a translation, right? Every translation is a commentary, and so when we rely on translation, we rely on a commentary when we don't even realize it. And I think this is a very good explanation. Example of that, right? That the Mialdot HaIvriyot is not a clear phrase, but it's just translated as the Hebrew midwives, right? Here, the Tirena et HaMialdot et HaElohim is translated as fearing God, as opposed to possibly their own gods, right? But it's unclear. The text is not as clear as it makes it sound on the English side. Perhaps they're Egyptian, perhaps they are not. In the previous chapter, it was a great one. I recommend it. We followed the Ramban's explanation of the reasons prompting Paro to apply to the midwives to carry out his dreadful decree to kill off the newborn Israeli males, a decree that was foiled by their display of moral courage. The question we wish to explore is who were the midwives? Two contradictory views have been advanced, both championed in Jewish Bible commentary from the earliest of times. So as I think I've said before, one of the things I love about her essays is that she's not afraid of the contradictions. So first she's going to go through I would say at least like what you're taught in day school mainstream approach. Rashi, Ibn Ezra, as well as Rashbam and the Ramban, echoing the Talmud, maintained that the midwives were Jewish. Right, so this first source from Masechet Sota explains that Rav and Shmuel had a disagreement. Chad Amar, one of them said, Isha uvita. One of them said that the midwives were a mother-daughter team. V'chad Amar Kala v'chamota. And one said it was a daughter-in-law, mother-in-law team. So who are we talking about? Manda Amar, Isha uvita. The one who says it's a woman and her daughter, who are we talking about? Yocheved uMiriam. Umanda Amar Kala v'chamota, one who's saying mother-in-law, daughter-in-law, it must be Yocheved ve'Elisheva. Elisheva is the wife of Aaron, her other son. So, right, so the Gemara assumes that they are Jewish. And as we'll see in the next source, or in the next sources, these are the three women that are sort of mentioned by name. And so it's got to be some combo of the three of them. Right, so maybe it's a mother-daughter team, or maybe it's a mother-in-law, daughter-in-law team, but it is definitely assumed that they are Jewish. And Rashi explains, Shifra Yocheved is Yocheved, al shem mishaferet et havalad, because she used to, Yocheved was called Shifra because she used to put the baby into a good physical condition, right? Mishaferet, by the care that she bestowed on it. So it's like right, it's like saying, oh, her name is Ku because she coos to the baby, right? And Pu'azo Miriam, this is Miriam, Shepo'ah umizaberet, because she used to call aloud and speak and croon to the baby. Kederech Hanashim, the way that women do when their babies cry. So I want to see, let's look at this and then talk about how Nechama approaches these Rashis. These are the Rashis I learned as a child. I taught them to a bat mitzvah student. I think it's like a pretty mainstream approach these days, right? It's because of the way their names sound, and it is Miriam and Yocheved. And she mentions early rabbinic homiletic commentaries abound in similar examples of important personalities bearing a number of names. This reflected ancient practice. But the Midrash was motivated by another consideration, as outlined by Isaac Heinemann. We can talk about who he is in a second. He's an Israeli scholar, contemporary of Nechama Leibowitz, to breathe life into figures who otherwise would remain but vague shadows for the reader. So I think that's such a good idea. I think it's called economy of characters, right? The idea like the Eved Avraham is Eliezer. We don't like people to go unnamed, and we like to give people more than one role. And I think what Isaac Heinemann is saying is really interesting. It's because we want to know more about people we don't know a lot about. And in most cases, the second name was regarded as a titular appellation descriptive of his character. So Hagar and Keturah is an interesting one. Keturah is like something that is nice smelling, like a nice thing. And so Hagar, we sometimes say, was actually Abraham's wife after Sarah. because she sort of comforted him in his older age. So on the
So
one hand, I
Rashi,
really like this explanation. It like sort of adds color to Miriam and Yocheved. Of course, Miriam and Yocheved already have like plenty of color in the Midrash. I'm not sure they needed to take on the midwife position too. But certainly with Hagar, right, or some other characters, like there's not a lot about them that we know. And so it is sort of nice to assign them other roles so that we can flesh out their character, if it makes sense. But I love this paragraph here because I, not being Nechama Leibowitz, did not know this about Rashi, right? But she's very harsh. What prompted Rashi, however, to cite this identification? He never cites homiletic explanations, least of all name lore, unless there's some textual warrant. So I didn't know this because it's such a famous Rashi, but apparently it's sort of a unique Rashi. Rashi doesn't buy into these homiletic explanations. And he doesn't like the name lore if there's not a textual warrant, which it seems there is not. The Mizrahi's proposal that a tradition has been handed down associating these names is hardly satisfactory in view of the fact that it was not Rashi's practice to reproduce every tradition of this nature. So she's saying like Rashi makes no sense. We know it's famous, but it's not the best explanation. What would prompt Rashi to do this? And she offers the Maharsha's explanation instead. So I'm going to give everyone some whiplash here, source sheet whiplash. So the Maharsha is Rabbi Shmuel Edel's. His acronym was Maharsha. He was a Polish rabbi, a child prodigy. I love that he was like sort of cloistered himself. He rejected marriage offers to just learn Torah. He eventually sort of gave in for good reason because he was supported by his mother-in-law for the rest of his life. So, if I wanted to be a Torah scholar exclusively, I might choose that too. And interestingly, he adopted her surname, Adel, in gratitude for her unwavering support. So he's a man, but I didn't know that about the Maharsha, that he had such an amazing female benefactress, which I thought was cool. And you can see Isaac Heinemann was born in Germany and came to Israel. So the Maharsha gives a different explanation. So let's come back up here. And she thinks one that is more plausible. And this is like a grammatical piece that the way that the psukim work, let's shift back up in the other way, right? It says Shem ha'achat shifra. One of them is named Shifra, v'shem hashenit pu'ah, and the other one is named Pu'ah. Right now, again, this is not a translation. It should have said the name of the one was Shifra, and the name of the second was Pu'ah. But this Shem ha'achat blank, v'shem hashenit blank, is like a key text, and the Maharsha brings us many examples that are meant to give us some kind of explanation. Okay, so here he explains in depth. I would think that this homiletic exposition is prompted by the deviant, one whose name was X, and the
excuse me,
other,
Rabbanit. What
yes,
is? I don't get what is this question? What's the extra word in the Rashi
in the
or in the
Rashi.
pasuk rather?
Oh, it's not an extra word, but he's going to say that there's a reason. Oops, sorry, a typo here. That there is a reason that we are choosing to anchor them back to Miriam and Yocheved. And the reason is this sort of set way of that the pasuk explains. It seems like a form, maybe is the way to say it. Right. And so when you have a form with like lots of blanks, one who's blank, the other who's blank, that automatically is a pattern that we can apply here as well. And that might have driven Rashi, meaning the Rashi's not just focused on the, what did she call it? The homiletic explanation or the name lore, but he actually sees this other pattern in the text that would indicate that this is the way we should go. Right, it's a collocation that only occurs after the text has explicitly announced the two who are involved. So her examples are from Bereshit, right? Peleg and his brother are named like that, and later on in Shemot, Gershom and Eliezer are named like that. When we talk about Eldad and Medad, right, you can see that each of them has a one and then the other. Literally, as you can see at the footnote, the second. And there's no previous mention in the text that there were two midwives, right? So if you're referring back to something and it's not there, There must be some other place where it is, because they wouldn't say Shem ha'achat v'Shem ha'shenit if the Torah hadn't already introduced the two proper names of those people. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
Oh. So here, right, we have that formula, that's the word I was looking for before in the text, right? One whose name was Shifra and the other whose name was Pua. This deviance afforded ground for the explication, the one or the other already referred to. Since only three women of that same generation, right, as I sort of mentioned before, are recorded by name in the Torah, Yocheved, Miriam, and Elisheva, the one and the other must be two of these three. And they assume that Yocheved is the one because she's the older woman. And so that's why the Gemara in Sota, right? The Maharsha is speaking way after the Gemara in Sota, but it seems like, and after Rashi, that he's saying that it has to be these three women, and we assume it's Yocheved and one of the others because of the way that the Torah lays it out, the one whose name and the other whose name. So it's kind of a grammatical, technical point. I think that however we explain it, it's driven by also a desire to make these midwives Jewish, right? So whether it's because of this sort of grammatical point, or whether it's because we assume they're Jewish, and these are the three Jewish women we know in the Torah, in the like this time period, um, or because they have like sort of sounds that give us more character description about them, those are these are the ways to make them Jewish, right? She says it
Maybe
so
the
beautifully
Rahmanut
here.
also.
Sorry?
Maybe the Rahmanut, Nashim Rahmaniyot, Jewish.
I'm sorry, I don't understand. Say it again.
Nashim Rahmaniyot, the fact that they had mercy and saved the baby.
Ah, thank you. Thank you. Yes. Okay. So I think that's a great point, right? What about them is Jewish, right? Is it that they saved the babies? Is it that they are Tirena et Elohim? Is it that they're God-fearing? Or is it that we know who they are and they just happen to be Jewish, right? It's a great point that you're making. And I think that Nechama is gonna really look into that, is what makes them Jewish, right? So if we accept this exposition, right, or earlier traditions that they're Jewish, they belong to that noble galaxy of Hebrew heroines who risked their lives to save their people. And the phrase miyaldot ha'ivriot is to be understood as a noun phrase composed of the nominal miyaldot, midwives, and ha'ivriot, Hebrew, as a modifier of the descriptive of the noun miyaldot. Okay, so that's one strain of thought, right? But there exists a counter tradition found as far back as Philo to the effect that the midwives were Egyptian. And I love that she quotes Josephus here, like just in line with the Ramban and the Maharsha, right? Because Josephus is a more, out there and also contentious character. For those who are not familiar with Josephus, he's a very early scholar and historian. He initially fought against the Romans during the First Jewish-Roman War, but ultimately defected to the Roman side. But his works are an important source of information on Jewish history during that time period, largely because they survived the test of time. But so Josephus mentions something interesting. Here we go. He says, alarmed thereat, the king, on this sage's advice, ordered that every male child born to the Israelites should be destroyed by being cast into the river, and that the labors of Hebrew women with child should be observed and watch kept for their delivery by the Egyptian midwives. For this office was, by his orders, to be performed by women who, as compatriots of the king, were not likely to transgress his will. Right, so what is Josephus saying? That it would be an odd choice to ask the Hebrew midwives to do this very terrible thing for the Paro. It would make much more sense for the Paro to ask people whom he trusted to do this thing, right? Though Josephus embellished the scriptural account and took no note of the gradual nature of Paro's decrees, he evidently reproduced a tradition that he imbibed in the rabbinical schools he attended in his youth, right? He was against the Romans at the beginning before he defected. He had a rabbinic education. He was a scholar. And she says he's citing the other strain, right? We don't have it in the Gemara, but we have we have it sort of contemporary to that time period. For we do find a similar tradition preserved in the Midrash Tadsha. I'm sorry, I did mean to look that one up and I missed it. I don't know what that 22 is. I'd have to look it up. And this is probably saintly. 22. It is 22 saintly Jewish, that's probably not the right number. Women are listed there, followed by their Gentile proselyte counterparts. 22 Jewish women are listed there, followed by their Gentile proselyte counterparts. And who are these saintly Gentiles? Hagar, Tzipporah, Shifra, Pua, Paro's daughter, Rachav, Ruth, and Yael. It's always shocking to me to see that my namesake was not Jewish. Right, these women feature in the Torah and in the Navi, right? Rachav appears in Yehoshua, I think. She saves two Jewish spies who have come into the land of Canaan. Ruth, right, who we read her Megillah on. Shavuos is the woman who is ultimately the matriarch of King David, because she went with her mother-in-law Nomi. Yael is the one who drove the tent peg into Sisera's forehead to win the war. And then Hagar, right, Sarah's maidservant, Abraham's other partner, perhaps, Zipporah, Moshe's wife, Shifra and Pua, and Paro's daughter. So this is super interesting to me, right? Shifra and Pua make it onto the list both of like Yocheved and Miriam, top Jewish women, and also onto the list of top non-Jewish women who do things that are saintly. The Midrash quotes chapter and verse to prove the saintliness of each and every one of them, including the midwives Shifra and Pua, about whom it is said the midwives feared God, which does not make them Jewish in the Midrash's book. It just makes them God-fearing, which I think is like sort of what you were saying, Rabbi Schwartz, right? That what is it about them? Oh, I see the problem here. What is it about them that made them save the babies? Perhaps it's because they were Jewish and their interest naturally aligns there, but perhaps it's just because they're God-fearing, which doesn't always mean Jewish. The commentary, the Imri Noam. So I had a hard time with him. I was a little bit in a rush, as I said. I wasted too much time yesterday deciding what to do.
There's
He's
the
a
grandson of the Rabshitzer, the son of the Jekover.
Excellent. I had no idea how to pronounce that, so thank you. Rabbi Meir Horowitz, as Rabbi Schwartz said, a Hasidic thinker of the Dikover dynasty, I guess you might say, lived in the 1800s. And to me, like there was something very Nechama Leibovich about quoting Josephus and then the Imri Noam side by side. Radically different thinkers of different time periods. And he says, Shifra and Pua were originally Egyptians who embraced Judaism. Otherwise, how could Paro have ordered them to kill Jews? How could they in the first place have agreed? Surely every Jew is obliged to sacrifice his life rather than commit idolatry, incest, or murder. Right? So he starts from the opinion that there's no way they were Jewish at the outset. They would definitely have just said no. That is why the text observes the midwives feared God, implying that previously, when they were still heathens, they had not feared him. Had they not been Egyptians, what would have been the point of telling us they feared God? Surely, as Jewesses, that was taken for granted. But though Paro offered them bribes, they refused to accept them. The text would have accordingly have to be read not the Hebrew midwives with Ivriot in attributive relation to Mialdot, but midwives of the Hebrews with Ivriot understood as the object of Mialdot, i.e. they acted as midwives to the Hebrew women. So there's something so very Hasidic about this idea, right? That of course every Jew is God-fearing. That's pashut, right? There's no question that that's what would be. And so surely they must not have been Jewish. But on the other hand, no one fears God but Jews, so they must have sort of come over. They are no longer heathens. They're now Jewish, or at least, related to our God at the end of the day. But they certainly started as Egyptians, and that seems very obvious to him because otherwise they would not have agreed to the task at all. So it's interesting to me that there's such a strong theological debate here, right? On the one hand, they must be Jewish, right, in the Gemara and Sota. On the other hand, we're saying, how could we even think they would have been Jewish? And the Shadal, who we have met before, accepts this reading as well. And he also quotes like a wild range of people, right? Unklus and Rashbam, Ramban, and the Raz, but also the Septuagint, the Vulgate, Josephus, and Abravanel is sort of thrown in there. Um, right, but both sides, right? Egyptians and Hebrews. And this is right, that they were Egyptian, right? These midwives of the Hebrews. Since how does it make any sense that Pharaoh would order Jewish women to destroy all the children of their own people and believe that they won't reveal such a thing? It's a great question, I think. Forgetting whether people were willing to die for these mitzvot Yahareg Val Yavor, it just seems hard to imagine that you would be able to do that to your own people. And Clericus affirms that if they were not Jewish, the text should have read midwives to the Hebrews. And the Raz, whose name is Rosenmuller, according to Nechama Leibowitz, comes and says that it should read the midwives that serve the Hebrews. This is a textual difficulty for him. He feels like there's a word missing, right, which is difficult. And then he comments, sort of in direct opposition to what we just learned, what is proved by the phrase, the midwives feared God, is no proof at all. Since it is not written here Hashem, rather Elohim, and anyone who has a God of truth or a God of falsehood, would fear killing babies that did not sin at all, whatever people they are from. Another fascinating, like, theological stake to throw in here, right? So on the one hand, we have only Jews would possibly not do this terrible thing. And on the other hand, he's saying, no, actually anyone that's like sort of religious from in some way, whether they're Egyptian from or right Christian from today, a Jewish from, would not do such a horrible thing. You must be godless to do such a terrible thing. And here, right, also sort of this broader perspective, he adds from his student that if they were from another people, it made more sense to say that they did this out of fear and not out of love. Since if they were Jewish, what need were there to be to remind us they feared God, since all humans love children of their own people, right? So I think that all of these points are not small, they're not minor, like which person do we get to play the midwife in the play, but real theological stakes being put down about what kind of person would agree or disagree to do this kind of thing. Nechama Leibowitz is not like the Shadal. His suggestion that whoever has a God, true or false, would instinctively recoil from immoral acts is, to say the least, astonishing. Surely the opposite is true. Crimes against humanity are more likely to be perpetrated in the names of false gods, right? And I think that is true, right? We often say, like, this was a war fought, for the honor of or the defense of, someone's God, that there's a lot more at stake then, right? On the other hand, whoever resists temptation and risks his life for his principles may be regarded as a worshiper of God, the true God, right? So maybe it goes on both sides. Christian commentators observed that Joseph's assertion, "For I fear God," was out of character for one who was trying to play a part of an authentic Egyptian word politician who could not speak a word of Hebrew and swore by the life of the Paro, right? So when Yosef says, "But for I fear God," when he's talking to Paro before he's revealed that he's Jewish, the Christian commentators are saying, well, no Egyptian would have said that. It's kind of like if you say Baruch Hashem, right? That's like giving you away as a from Jew today. And that seems to sort of be similar to what they're saying there. But this is not true. In the Bible, the fear of God is a demand made on every person created in his image, right? So I think it's hard to straddle both sides, but Nechama does it beautifully, right? On the one hand, anyone who believes in God surely couldn't do these terrible things. On the other hand, we think that everyone is supposed to believe in God, right? The fear of God is a demand made on every person created in God's image. A Gentile devoid of the fear of God is branded by the Bible as a traitor to his elementary obligations as a human being. What a statement, right? She's saying whether you're Egyptian or Jewish, you have this human element to you, which should be to acknowledge God, right? No atheists in her class here. And she brings a proof text from Abraham's statement about the state of Egypt, right? That Abraham, right, when defending himself about pretending Sarah is his sister, he says, well, Rak ein yirat Elokim b'makom hazeh. I was worried they would kill me because there was no fear of God. One does not expect to find the fear of God in all communities. Wherever it is lacking, the worst can be expected. And a similar observation is made regarding Amalek, right? That they met us on the road and cut down the stragglers in the back because they showed no fear of God. And so now I think she makes this brilliant and beautiful last point, right? That like pulls it all together. These four contexts share a significant common feature. They remark on the presence or absence of the fear of God as exemplified in the conduct of the Gentile. He is praised for being God-fearing or condemned for lacking that quality. It is the attitude towards the minority, to the defenseless outsider or stranger, that determines whether a particular group or person or group possesses the fear of God. This is a further reason for identifying the midwives as Egyptian. The text observes in their case that the midwives feared God. In addition, we should bear in mind the Ramban's interpretation of Paro's policy. The latter did not wish to pursue his policy of discrimination openly, so as not to arouse opposition to the atrocity involved. How then could he have applied to the Hebrew midwives? If we accept the midwives were Egyptian, another and very vital message becomes apparent. The Torah indicates how the individual can resist evil. He need not shirk his moral responsibility under cover of superior orders. The text contrasts the brutal decrees of enslavement and massacre initiated by Paro and supported by government and people with the God-fearing civil disobedience of the midwives. Practice that sentence, I still mess it up, right? Contrasts the Paro and his government versus the people who are God-fearing with civil disobedience. Neither moral courage nor sheer wickedness are ethnically or nationally determined qualities. Moab and Amnon produced a Ruth and Naamah respectively. Egypt, two righteous midwives. And that's it. That's like her mic drop, right? The Egyptians produced righteous midwives, and that the way that one can be righteous is not complicated, right? She's saying all you have to do is be God-fearing. People who are God-fearing will be guided in the right direction for how to act no matter what. And so therefore, making the midwives Egyptian is not just a statement about whether non-Jews can be God-fearing or should be God-fearing, but it's about how to ensure that we do the right thing in life. That was the way that the midwives knew the right path to take, was because they were God-fearing. So I don't know. I'm curious what other people think before I say anything else.
Um, I'm much taken by the last section here and the insistence that God-fearing people can uh, be anywhere. But what comes to mind is another example that is not mentioned here, and that's Jonah's experience on the ship, uh, trying to
That's a
escape
nice
from
one.
God.
Yeah.
And of course, the other people on the boat, when they get into trouble with the storm, they are all praying and making sacrifices and wondering why he's not doing that.
Yeah.
And, their attitude. And then when he says, it's me, just throw me overboard, the sea, and that will solve the problem. And they won't do it because they're afraid of his God who can
Yeah.
make such a tremendous mess of the sea. And then they're going to go and do something which they recognize as criminal, which is to take a life, an innocent life. So, and
Hmm.
And then I've read elsewhere, probably Jonathan Sacks makes a distinction between the terms Elohim and Hashem, and points out that when it's non-Israelites who are recognizing God, it's Elohim. Okay, it's
Hmm.
the God we usually associate with um, strict justice and warrior-like qualities and so on, as opposed to the God of love, presumably
Hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
Tetragrammaton, which that
Right.
name is only heard in the mouths of the Israelites.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yes, right. So that's possible, right? There are lots of ways to read the Elohim. Certainly, you could mean it to be the Jewish God, or it could be other gods. I think your example of the sailors is excellent, right? That they weren't willing to kill Yonah because they were God-fearing, right? Whatever that means.
and there were also leaders. non-Israelite leaders who made pacts with
Mhm.
Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, different stories.
Mhm. Yeah, Elena,
Um,
good
and
example.
they do sacrifices together, but it was because they're trying to avoid bloodshed and conflict and other disagreeable ways of dealing with each other to spare lives.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like, I wonder what people think about atheists. I don't know if anyone has an atheist near and dear to their heart, right? But, this is not, I think it doesn't leave a very good uh, observation of an atheist, right? That they cannot be moral and sort of judged by some kind of moral compass or higher value because you must be God-fearing to have that in you. Seems to be her implication, I think.
I've known about atheists, Jewish people, that were extremely moral and very rachamim, very compassionate, and they certainly claim to be atheists, communist atheists slash, and they're still really good people.
Yeah, I think it's troubling. Like on the one hand, I like her ending paragraph. I think it's beautiful. On the other hand, I think it leaves open a big question. Um,
For the
certainly to
first
be
time, I'm at a
God-fearing. Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, sorry, sorry. No, I'm just at a total loss here. I don't know what's going on. For one thing, so she's concluding that they were not Ivriot, that they were not Jewish. Is that what she's
Yes.
concluding?
Yes. Again, based on many commentaries, right? Not just those
Right.
sort of claiming ancient commentaries, but the Maharsha and the Imre Noam and
Right. Which I didn't. The Imnei Noam seemed to be majorly arguing with Rashi.
yeah.
And then what? And then what happens to the pasuk? I think it's a pasuk. I don't think it's Rashi. That they were rewarded with batim, with houses. Who else would have
Yeah.
been rewarded with batim if
So it's a
not?
great, right? That's a great point. Another great point of like an ambiguous phrase, right? I think this is what I taught the last time I taught about the male dote was maybe the batim are sort of the dynasties that come out of them, right? That's one option. The children that and generations of children that Yocheved and Miriam have, right, lead to great dynasties of Jewish people. Or maybe it was houses, right? They got better housing when they did the right, like, when they did the right thing for Paro. It's hard to know exactly what that means. Sorry, when they did the right thing for God. They got the batim when they did the right thing for God. It was a physical reward. You could follow, I guess I'm saying you could follow either strands and have proof text on either direction. Yeah, Nelson, please. Oh, but you're muted.
I can only think of a joke.
Okay.
The rabbi and his wife are walking by a corner and they see two guys arguing. They say, Rabbi, am I right? You're right. The other wife says, You're right, I'm right. And the wife says, How can they both be right? You're right. So
Yeah, look,
that's the
I
problem.
do think that like on some level that is not what Nechama Leibovitz is trying to like walk that line, right? Like she brings the thorough breakdown of the first option. She says that the Shadal doesn't make so much sense, but she ends with the Egyptians. But yes, I think it's definitely possible for both
Yeah.
perspectives to be considered right.
Yeah, but there's all this mixture of the righteous Gentile working together with the Jew. Are they one? They behaving like Jews, but they are not Jews. So and the names, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah. And I think I just hadn't realized quite how much seemed to be at stake here. Like the theological claims being made by saying Egyptian or Jewish or, what are we saying about what it means to be God-fearing? Who can be God-fearing? What that leads us to be when we are fearing of God. And, I have to agree with Nechama there. Like, I don't think all God-fearing people never commit atrocities, unfortunately. I think sometimes our fear of God pushes us to do very bad things. And when we hide behind saying, well, we're God-fearing, so it might be right, that's a very dangerous, dangerous path to go down. Yeah.
Quick comments about the Imre Noam.
Sorry?
Quick comments about the Imre
Oh,
Noam.
sure.
I had the scoot for a period of time. The great Chazan Silber, who just passed away this past year in Chicago.
Hmm.
He taught me. I can say we learned the Imre Noam. He was an
Hmm.
expert in all of that stuff. And all I know
Cool.
is that while we were learning the Imre Noam, he would always look at me and say to me, "Et got offen Augen." He had open eyes. He said he saw way beyond anything else.
Hmm. Hmm. Beautiful.
And the other thing I was thinking is all these different times, the different rabbis, Rambam and Rashi, they live in different times, and each one had one perception. Is there an evolution that's going on in the thought interpretation, and the understanding of the Torah?
Hmm.
Is there a understanding for this era as opposed to another era, and how do
Mhm.
they get together? The Talmud has people from different centuries arguing between themselves.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, right? So Josephus and the times of the Gemara are not identical, but they are close to each other. I think it's a good point though, meaning how might the Rambam, who worked heavily with the Egyptian rulership, right, who was the doctor to many of these higher up people, how might he have interpreted this versus Rashi, who lived in France and probably didn't have much interaction with any royalty, right? Um, People who lived in more of the bubble or the ghetto of right where they didn't have interaction with non-Jews, I have to imagine they just came at it with a different perspective on some level. Um,
Well,
you
Rashi
know,
lived into the era of the Crusades. The relationship of his community with the outside would be different under those circumstances,
mhm.
uh, perhaps in more peaceful times. Um, I had a few fleeting thoughts about, first of all, taking both sides of the argument doesn't necessarily mean that Nechama Leibowitz was coming down strongly on one or the other, but uh, questioning received tradition is certainly part of the received tradition. Uh,
Mhm.
and I loved, I think it was Rabbi Shmuel, oh, I've forgotten his name, but at any rate, in an article about is there such a thing as a Jewish atheist?
Hmm.
He pointed to uh, oh, I'm blanking on this again, the comedian who has all these movies, who's you'd never mistake him for a frum person. But when he was called an atheist by an interviewer, he said, "Oh, no, 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 no. I'm not an atheist. I'm God's loyal opposition." And so the rabbi who was writing this article points, that his point is that um, arguing against God and misbehaving, that doesn't mean you don't believe in God or that you don't fear God.
Hmm.
The opposite of the righteous behavior is indifference, not
Hmm.
not argumentation and opposition or even subversion.
And that seems sort of like what the Shadal is saying, right? God-fearing people don't do terrible things, right? Indifference leads to terrible things. Um,
And that God-fearing coming from the outside, from people who maybe are observing and changing their minds, it can simply mean your God seems to be more powerful than ours. I
mhm.
better not do anything to attract his attention
Hmm.
that would make him, kill me.
Mm-hmm. When I read it, I thought of my freshman year in college when I had a random roommate assigned to me, and she was a frum Christian, so to speak. She went to church on Sundays. She had her, frum Christian boyfriend who went to school in some other kind of state, and she dressed pretty modestly, and she was a dream to live with, I have to say, because when I said sort of crazy things like, oh, if the light is on, I'm just going to leave it on. But if I'm sleeping when you come in, please feel free to turn it off, right? She didn't say, or I left the phone, so she knocked the phone off the hook and she came home and found it was still on while I was sleeping, right? That didn't seem weird to her because she understood the like idea of a rigid code belonging to a, religious practice. Whereas I had wonderful friends who were not religious Jews who like totally didn't understand those things, right? Saying that like all God-fearing people have some sort of similarity, I think is it resonated for me, I guess is what I'm saying, right? That there was some kind of understanding of like what people do. But on the other hand, I think that we all can think of someone who we feel has abused their God-fearing claim to do bad things, right? That they thought God wanted them to do it, or they felt they were doing it to defend God, right? I don't know. And I think you're right. It's not clear which side she comes down on, but I do think that the fact that she portrays it last, that like her closing sentence is the Egyptians produced two righteous midwives, does seem to indicate maybe her show of hands, at least a little bit. um,
I, I
lot to chew on. Yeah, please, Nelson.
I know it's late, but just one I just remembered
Sure.
one podcast, the
Mm,
one of the Hartman Institute podcast. They have Yossi
mm,
Klinger Levy and Daniel
mm,
Hartman debating.
mhm.
There was one
Yeah.
that Donnie said, Yossi, I am jealous of you. You are a believer but non-observant. I am observant but non-believer. So it
Mm.
just explored that.
Right, right. They don't always go, right? Like, and always is always a dangerous thing to say. I agree with you, right? There's a mix of people out there. But it seems like people felt there was a lot riding on the nationality of these midwives because it said something about what it meant to be God-fearing. And I guess I think that's the interesting part of it. But I agree with you, right? Always is a hard thing to say.
That
Um,
Jewish.
well, there's plenty packed into this Parsha, so whether you can continue to think about this or something else, I hope everyone stays warm this week and healthy and safe and survives this cold front. And I look forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah,
Thank
next
you.
year we're
Thank
debating Parsha
you.
again.
Thank you.
Oh, nice.
Thanks so much for picking a good one.
Good. I'm glad. Yes. It seems like it's going to be hard to choose these days. Well, have a good night and an early Shabbat Shalom.
Thank
See you
you.
next time.
Yes,